give it a couple more minutes and then we'll begin. Okay, well, I do want to be respectful of folks' time, so we'll get started. And as I said, this will be recorded, so others will be able to jump on and be able to see this and get the information. I'm Michelle Schipper. I am the CEO of the Institute of Southern Jewish Life, and I'm very happy that you are joining us this evening. I'm also very happy to welcome Rabbi Caroline Sim, who is the new Director of Rabbinical Services here at the ISJL, and who will be leading us in a very thoughtful discussion and giving us some new tools as we navigate our high holidays together. So, Rabbi Sim, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. So, like Michelle said, my name is Rabbi Caroline Sim. I know some of you were in the Meet the Rabbi the other day, and some might be planning to do the next one, but just as a little intro, I'm from Cincinnati. I went to the HUC Cincinnati campus, and I was only recently ordained in the end of May, so I have some familiarity with how to translate something that's normally done in person into a digital format and still make it meaningful. So I just wanted to say before we get started with the presentation, just to let you all know that I'm going to do a presentation because there's a lot of information to go through. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. And I will do questions and answers all together at the very end. And also, just as a reminder, I'm going to be listing a couple of different resources on here. Don't worry about writing them down because we'll have a list of resources going out after this presentation. So don't worry about getting everything this exact second. And like Michelle said, this is all being recorded. So, all right, without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Okay, so, all right. So just as an overview as to what this actual meeting is about, what this presentation is about, it's about resources for decision-making in terms of if you're going to have a digital or a physical or a hybrid service. And things to consider when you're making that decision or when you're trying to put together plans for that. Some advice for beginning the process and some things to keep in mind as you're going into this new process, as well as a couple of ideas for alternate service forms. And like I said, we'll be sharing a list of resources after the meeting. I just want to say really quickly that what we will not be doing today is that I'm not going to be giving you an instruction manual for how to do this because I can't. Every community is different. Everyone has different needs. Everyone has different focal points of their worship. So there's not really an instruction manual or a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And also this particular meeting is not going to be about liturgy. And I'd also like to just state for the record that this is not an authoritative presentation. I'm just giving you guys ideas and advice. but I in no way are trying to like tell you what to do. Alrighty, so first off, in terms of making the decision, we've got a whole bunch of different organizational resources from the CDC, from the Secure Community Network, the URJ, the USCJ, and a bunch of them have different resources specifically for COVID, and in the cases of the URJ and the USCJ and the RA, COVID and High Holiday. The URJ tent in particular has a High Holiday group that has all the different webinars that they've had posted to it. The USCJ as well has webinars and High Holiday resources. I'm not sure about URJ, but I do know the USCJ allows you to access at least some of the webinars without needing a login. So you'll have to play around and see what works for you. So when you're also making this decision, in addition to those other resources which concern COVID and reopening, that sort of thing, you have to think about your own synagogue specifically. How big is your worship space? Some of you might have smaller spaces or larger spaces, and numbers of people within that space, and how many people you're trying to coordinate into this new worship form. And also the demographics and age of your community. A community that has a bunch of younger families is going to have different needs and different capabilities than, primarily senior citizens. So, just keep these things in mind as you're making that decision. So just in terms of a couple of major categories, you have the digital versus the physical or in-person type services. So when you're thinking about doing a digital service, where are you streaming from? Are you streaming from your synagogue, or are you streaming from a service leader's home? And if you're streaming from the synagogue, is the internet that's there, is it fast enough, or does it have enough bandwidth, to accommodate video streaming? Can most of your congregants use Zoom or the internet, or do they have access to video conferencing? And in terms of prayer books, did you want to do digital prayer books, or figure out a way to coordinate physical prayer books? Having congregants come and picking up a prayer book at different times, or figuring out a way to play around with the digital prayer books. And as an aside, both the URJ and the USCJ have digital versions of their prayer books online. In the case of the URJ, also the Gates of Repentance, they have now made a PDF for, so if that's your prayer book, they do have a digital resource for that now as well. In terms of the Torah reading, especially if you're not doing this in your synagogue, how are you going to do that? Is somebody going to bring a Torah home? Are you going to read out of a tikkun, or a book that has the Hebrew in it? How are you going to do that? And also the length of services. A Zoom meeting shouldn't really be more than an hour, hour and a half max. And as we all know, most high holiday services tend to last more than that. So keeping in mind that if you're doing something digital, things are going to have to get a little bit tighter. And along with that, you might want to think about the number of services. If there are many parts of the liturgy you want to keep, but that's going to go over an hour and a half, you might want to make more services with different liturgy components, or or some other alternative like that. In terms of physical or in-person services, you have to figure out the logistics of social distancing. And also, if you're doing something inside, even if you have a larger synagogue space, you have to think about air circulation. Because if you're inside an enclosed space, then, it doesn't, even if you're physically far from each other, you have to think about where that air is going. Along with that comes singing. If you're in person and you're singing, there's been a lot of discussion in the Reform rabbinic community about maybe asking congregants either not to sing or to only hum, because if you're singing, you're obviously expelling a lot of air out of your mouth, which of course is not very conducive to limiting the spread of things. And so again, with the singing, the congregation singing, some people have a cantor or a soloist. And, you know, if you have a cantor or soloist, where on the bima is the cantor or soloist going to be in relation to the prayer leader? And both of them in relation to the congregation. You're going to have to worry more about how to enter and exit the prayer space in the building in general. If you're going to take people's temperatures, if you're going to offer masks or not, or hand sanitizer, or other kinds of precautions. And seating. Are you going to assign seats to make sure that you have people logistically planned out properly, or you're going to let people choose their own seats, like a different year? And then also, because of social distancing and because of these other procedures about entering and exiting the building, you have to figure out a way to do it with late arrivals and early departures from services. So hybrid services, you've got to think about all those components from the previous slide, plus where are the physical and digital services going to be held? Are you going to need extra resources? You know, because if you're doing some things that are digital versus some things that are physical, they might have overlapping resources, or they might have different sets of resources that you have to make sure that you cover. When are you going to have the services? So, you know, with a digital service, you can pretty much have that any time, but with physical services, especially if you want to say do them outside, time of day, weather, that sort of thing does factor into it. And again, this is another instance where you might want to do multiple or additional services. So for example, if you wanted to have Yizkor in person, because having, I don't know, say having a 10-person minyan physically be present is important to your worship practice, you might want to consider using the days of awe, using the time from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, and have multiple different Yizkor services. So that way, you know, even if you have a smaller space, or if you're only going to be outside or something like that, you can plan to have people who want to physically be there, and then not worry about, if you have a larger community, not worrying about trying to socially distance everybody. So when you're thinking about going about planning for the high holidays, this is going to be a conceptually somewhat different process than previous years. So before you even plan, just try to reframe your thinking, or try to put things in a positive mindset. This is more about best principles, not best practices, right? The ideas behind what you do are ultimately going to be more important than the logistics of what you do. You're going to be creating new forms of worship, not sacrificing traditions. You're going to be, you know, creating new traditions even. And this is an opportunity to explore new forms of worship, new forms of expression, not a problem of logistics. So the other thing is make sure you are having the same conversation, because you can ask the question, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And I could be talking either about the ideas or the philosophy behind the planning, or I could be talking about the logistics of execution. So whenever you do sit down together, make sure that you're having the same conversation at whatever point in time you're having it. And you also need to think about what are the most important parts of the high holidays. You might have to force rank what is the most important or the most meaningful for your community. It will likely be very difficult. But by doing so, it'll help you focus on specific goals and help focus the process as you're creating this new high holiday experience. But just keep in mind that everything might not be possible. Listen to your community as you are planning. I strongly suggest a congregational survey, because this will allow whoever is doing the planning to understand the members' actual needs and wants. And that's another thing also, you need to figure out who is making the decision. I've heard that some people have COVID, what's it called, committees, COVID committees, or high holiday committees, or something else. Some people, some communities are small enough where the board is making the decision. You need to figure out who is actually making this decision, and then figure out how you're going to interact with the community from there. So with that in mind, communication is key. making sure the community is informed and updated as you go along, even if you haven't finalized things, just making sure that people stay updated. And the other thing is that you can use experimentation. Everybody knows this is a hard year. Everybody knows we're going to be doing things we're not used to be doing. And so test out the ideas, especially Shabbat services are a great way to test out ideas, see if something works, you know, that you're trying out, and people will be understanding. They know that this is different from other years. But also by experimenting, you know, with the community, testing it out in the community, it will involve the community in the decision and help create a more meaningful holiday experience for everyone in the community. Couple things to keep in mind, some troubleshooting and advice. There are certain things that just will not work digitally, and live music or multiple people singing and speaking at once just don't work digitally. Zoom cannot handle what's required to do singing live. The same technology that phases out background noise and makes all of our volumes the same level also gets rid of all the stuff that makes a live voice special. And it also means that it will order whoever's speaking at the same time. So even if you're doing a congregational response or a collective reading and response, all those people have to be on mute, and they can be saying it together communally on their own. But if you try to have multiple people talking at the same time, that just doesn't work with Zoom. It doesn't sync up with each other, and then there's a bit of a verbal soup. There's also a few things that we're still seeking solutions for that we don't really have a good answer for yet. One is like the annual appeal. How do we include it? Do we include it? You know, and fundraising in general is a little bit of an issue that nobody seems to really have a good answer for yet. The other thing is the food drive. A lot of synagogues have food drives, and you know that can be problematic with you know, ideas of touching things and that sort of concern. So you might want to check with your local your food pantry or whoever you normally donate to, and ask them what's most helpful to them. They might already have a system in place, and then you don't have to worry about it because they already have a solution for you. Another thing is that I know Amazon has wish lists or registry, and you know, Kroger and a bunch of other places now do digital shopping. So you might be able to coordinate a digital shopping list, or have people commit to donating for X, Y, or Z items, and then have one person go and buy the materials. But again, there's not like a set of solutions that are just ready-made for us yet. It has to be explored. Some additional concerns is, especially if you're not used to service leading, the stress on the service leader in a digital versus a physical service. When you're leading in a physical service, you don't have to be speaking or singing 100% of the time. So for instance, if I'm leading and the congregation is responding back to me, I can take a breath, or I can take a swallow, or I can, you know, pause for a second if I need to do that. If we're singing a song together, I can skip singing a couple of lines if I need to give my voice a brief rest, because the rest of the congregation is still singing. I cannot do that on Zoom because I'm the only one who's going to be singing or saying anything the entire time, even for the congregational responses. And if I'm not speaking or saying anything, then it's just dead air. So again, and this plays into the length of services. And as I spoke before, prayer book distribution, what prayer books you're going to use, how you're going to get them to people. If you're doing digital, do you want to have multiple cameras? Is there a tech person who's in charge of, you know, of the Zoom meeting in general, and in switching the cameras and spotlighting people? Do you have somebody for troll patrol to watch out for people who are uninvited guests, let's say, to our services who might not make themselves welcome? You also need to think about sound. If you're doing something digital, most video conferencing cameras that most people in general have are monodirectional with their sound, which means sound only comes in from one direction. So if somebody turns their body left or right or bends their head down to read, the sound doesn't get picked up on the mic. So you need to think about how you're going to be leading the service, or maybe have an additional mic set up. If you're going to be outside, you might be able to accommodate social distancing that way, but you still have to worry about everybody hearing what you're saying. So you might need some additional audio equipment to accommodate that. And again, with creating multiple services, you can have different outcomes for that. You can have different setups for that. But again, you have to make sure that you're thinking, especially if you're doing this in a physical aspect, weather, time of day, circulation, all kinds of different concerns with that. So again, because Zoom lends itself to shorter time periods and high holiday services lend themselves to longer time periods, it means that liturgically some things are going to have to get cut. So again, be mindful of service length, and even if you're outside, for example, just making sure about weather and daylight. Go back to your list of what's most important to your community, and you can edit the service from there. But again, if you keep those most important things at the center, then that makes these other decisions a little bit easier. So the Torah service. What I've heard from some of my rabbinical colleagues is that some of them have chosen to take out the Torah service from the normal liturgy and offer it separately. So if somebody wants to hear the Torah read, there's a separate Zoom session for that, or a separate physical session for that. And if they want to do a Torah study and discuss the Torah portion, there's a separate service for that. And that way the Torah service is not then a part of the normal Rosh Hashanah morning or Yom Kippur morning liturgy. The other thing that I'm hearing a lot of is cutting the big sermon, cutting it down, certainly not cutting it out, but cutting out the extra speeches and addresses from the board, which again goes back to the congregational appeal and how to fit that in, or if to fit that in. If you have an hour to do your service or an hour and a half to do your service, do you want to take 10 minutes, that 10%, and have a sermon and then have another 10% for a board address? So it's just about managing your time and figuring out what you want to focus on. And with your hybrid services, you can have parts of the liturgy separate from Zoom, obviously. So, some people I've heard discussing doing, say, a shofar sounding in their temple parking lot and having kind of like a revolving car situation so people can hear the shofar in person. Because again, audio doesn't tend, music, including blowing a shofar, doesn't tend to work as well over Zoom. So then there's some other possibilities for this particular time period. Most of us are used to using Zoom in our daily lives, and a lot of us have Zoom fatigue at this point. So it might be nice to set up a sacred space, set up a separate space specifically for when you are Zooming to High Holiday, if you're choosing to do the digital format. And you can also use the month of Elul to work with your congregation into setting up a holy space or a sacred space physically or mentally, spiritually with your congregation to try to tap into that normal feeling that we normally get when we go to our high holiday services. And again, you can also use the days of awe. You don't have to do everything on Yom Kippur. You don't have to do everything on Rosh Hashanah day. You can space out things into the days of awe. And, a digital format, or even if you're doing smaller in-person things, because a lot of us are at home now, it allows people to accommodate their schedules a little bit better. All right. So a few final remarks. Just to reiterate, this is an opportunity, right? We have the opportunity to create new forms of worship, new forms of expression, to experiment with new things. You know, if there are things that you've been doing for years that you don't particularly like or don't understand why we're doing them, but they're Sinai, they're from Sinai, they've been done forever, and you might just not want to include them this year, you have the opportunity to do that. This is also a challenge. This entire process is a challenge, even for the most experienced service leaders. It's very difficult to translate what you're used to doing in person into a digital format, or to do something hybrid, or to do something where your congregation is more spread out because of social distancing. So this is going to be difficult, and that's normal, and it's just how it is. And make sure you begin to plan this early. I mean, I know we're all here in June talking about this, which means that we're all thinking about it early, but really start planning it early, because it's going to take a long time. Especially if you do a digital service, just the putting together the stuff for Zoom, for a Zoom service, will take more. I mean, you can't plan the service in an afternoon. This is going to take a lot of sessions. This is going to take a lot of time. This is going to take a lot of thought. This is going to take a lot of reflection. And especially if you want to, you know, get your community feedback, you really have to start planning things pretty early. This is also, this is also an opportunity I had forgotten to add before. You know, there's people in the community who might not normally contribute to the high holidays who might now be able to. So some of you might have children or grandchildren who are really great with computers, and maybe some of the board members aren't, or whoever's making decisions aren't. And this is a way to involve those people into the process, because they have useful skills, and hopefully that can draw them into the community a bit more. So at this point, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. If you can type them into the group chat, or if you want to raise your hand, please feel free to do so.
Rabbi Sim, I'm going to ask if you'll stop sharing. That way we can all see each other. And for those who came in just a few minutes later, if you would just type into the chat, number one, your name and what community you're with. And I think we're of a size group that if you want to just raise your hand, we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself with any questions. Howard.
Yeah, one of the things we've been thinking about, particularly for Yom Kippur, you mentioned the importance of being practical and limiting the length of an online service. We're thinking about the added risk, if we're able to do it live at all, of being in one place together for hour after hour after hour, you know, from the morning service to the practically, you know, with some breaks, obviously, to the you know, the break fast. And so we're thinking about maybe we do the morning service live, and then perhaps, and I'm getting from what you're saying, maybe Yisker live, because it's so much more meaningful, and then the afternoon or concluding service online, something like that, from people's homes.
Yeah, any of that would work. And again, I threw out the Yisker example because that's an example I've heard a lot in the rabbinical community. I'm in no way saying that you should or you shouldn't, whatever works best for your community. But in general, from my own personal experience, a lot of Reformed congregations, at least, tend to lump multiple Yom Kippur ceremonies together. So there have been certain years where I've led Yisker, Ne'ilah, and conclude. You know, I've lumped 3 services together, which are the essentially afternoon and evening of Yom Kippur. And you don't have to do that this year. You could, you know, do shorter services and do 3 smaller services, either on Zoom or physical. If you wanted to do things where the morning was physical and then the afternoon was not, again, that's however you want to do things. But, you know, that might, in terms of psychology, be better, because I don't know that we're going to be able to do break the fast together this year. So if we're already doing the evening services or the afternoon of Yom Kippur digitally, then we're not physically there at the temple and then having to go home and not do break the fast together. So, you know, this is all just thinking about lots of different options and different ways of doing things.
Is there a different way to think about a minyan online versus live?
So different movements have put out different responses to this. In general, I think that the reform has said that, you know, a digital minyan is fine. I believe the conservatives have also now put out, because of COVID, that a digital minyan is fine. There's something called pikuach nefesh. This is the, you know, putting the life of somebody above all else. Any law in Judaism can be broken except for three for the sake of saving somebody's life. And when we're talking about this COVID situation, just about every single rabbi, Reform Conservative Reconstructionist, will say that pikuach nefesh, that the person's soul, that health and safety you know, take superiority to these other to the other issues.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes. Hi, Leslie Mark, Temple B'nai Israel here in Tupelo. So has anybody talked to y'all about potentially being able to bring in negative air or to do anything physically about having better air exchangers so that if we are choosing to do the social distancing, short service in place, how might we make our synagogues a little healthier? Because let's face it, we can't open the window and let some fresh air in. I don't know about y'all, but we only have the doors. So, you know, has there been any discussion throughout other communities about something like that?
So I personally have not seen discussion about that, but I also personally have not been looking for a discussion specifically about that. I'm not a health professional, and I would consult people who are more in that sort of industry or business to get advice on that, because I honestly just don't have the background to tell you about negative air or anything else like that that might make your congregation safer. However, I do think it's good, and I think it speaks to the idea that you're trying to consult your resources and trying to think of solutions, that you're thinking about air circulation, thinking about how to manage your physical space if you're choosing to do a physical service.
Well, we're very fortunate. This is where being small can really be a good thing, because we're able to have more distancing between people because we don't have a large crowd. So we can spread the seating out and be able to let people come in. But to have a long service, because we know the longer the potential exposure, the higher that risk. So if our numbers, we start seeing the decline, and we can potentially have services, and I say that because Northeast Mississippi has seen a rise within the last couple of days. And plus we're moving into when we move into the fall season, they expect to see an increase at that time as well. So it's almost as though we have to plan for either or.
So one of the things that I had forgotten to mention, thank you for reminding me, I would suggest planning multiple services. So for example, you know, my rabbinic class, when we were planning our ordination, normally that's a physical service. We planned 4 different options, from being able to meet in person with our immediate family to 100% digital, and different permutations along that spectrum. So when the final decision came out from HUC, we had a solution, and we had a service ready to go. This will take more work, but it will mean that since we can't predict exactly what's going to be happening a couple months down the line, you will have a solution set and ready. So like I said, planning for multiple options is a good idea. And when you're talking about having a long service or a shorter service or what have you in a physical space, I know I had said about cutting down the liturgy or cutting down the service length in a digital context, but especially like in your example where you don't have windows and air circulation is an issue, it might also be advisable to cut down the length of the service. You know, and then I'm sure that you guys have big fans or something like that you can put in the doorway and try to circulate some of that air through when nobody's in the synagogue or something like that. But again, I'm not somebody who can really speak authoritatively at all about circulating air or that sort of thing. But I do know that if you limit the amount of time that people are together, then you limit the possibilities of exposure.
Anecdotally, I'll just say, Leslie, here in Jackson, Beth Israel congregation is right next door to another church. And it's almost like, you know, the church folks said, when we see and we share a parking lot. So it works well, Friday night, Saturday, you know, Sunday morning, all good. And they pretty much said to the rabbi, when we see the cars in the parking lot on Friday nights, we'll know that we're okay to start having worship services in person again. So I also might suggest, you know, if you've got local other religious buildings, that you may want to just be in touch with them. What are you doing? Or to find out about circulation. Okay, maybe that's not a great idea. I'm seeing Leslie's head going, but
Well,
you know, it's another thought.
right.
You
And
know,
the reason I say that is several of our very large churches here have already started meeting, and they're not, I'm just going to say they've already started.
Got it.
We do rent, the Universal Unitarians utilize our temple on Sundays because we're not there on Sundays. And they actually contacted us just last week to say that they will not be returning for at least 6 months to 12 months.
Wow.
They've already made that decision amongst their people,
Yeah.
because they are an aging population. And it's a high concern because Tupelo, you know, we have no children. We are an aging congregation. There's just no way around that. And so how do we balance this? Because we are all desperate to see each other. And like the Zoom burnout, you know, for a lot of people, it's just not the same thing. I even threw out the idea of renting a tent and being able to break the fast outside. It wasn't received as well as I would have thought, but you know, I'm almost desperate to see everybody. So we're just trying to find out how we can do it. I'll just tell you, and it's a little off topic, but we're actually considering opening up Friday, July 10th for an in-person, but we don't expect more than 10 or 12 people. We're small, so we can social distance. But again, it's all about rise and fall of the virus. So I do appreciate everything that you guys are bringing forth. So I'll get back onto topic. So have you guys had any conversation with CCAR or any of the book publishers about providing a digital format for the prayer books?
So as I had said earlier, both conservative and reform movements, and actually the Reconstructionists, I believe, also have digital formats of their books. I'm assuming you guys are reform, right?
We are, yes.
Okay, so they have the basic Mishkan Tefillah and Mishkan HaNefesh up online. They also have a basic visual tefillah, which is like if you've gone to a synagogue and they have a big screen up, and it'll have like a digital version of the service on essentially on PowerPoint slides. They have a digital version of that up as well. And they've also scanned a PDF version of Gates of Repentance. So if you use the Gates of Repentance, there's also a PDF version of that. You know, that being said, you know, I've also seen people do services where they have a PowerPoint presentation up and they take a digital image of, you know, the Mishkan Tefillah and Mishkan HaNefesh are also in Kindle format. So, you know, you could do a screen cap of that and put your prayers on a PowerPoint, and, you know, then you don't have to worry about page flipping. But then, you know, sometimes it can be exhausting only seeing a PowerPoint slide the entire time. So it's about balance. But yes, digital versions are available. With the conservative, you have to fill out a form to get access to the digital book. I think with the URJ, you might have to log into the website in order to download a copy. I'm not sure about that though.
We'll find out and we'll let you know.
That'd be
Yep.
great.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to say also, you know, in terms of a physical service, it doesn't have to be in your synagogue. It can be also outside. It can be in the parking lot. I know that there was one rabbi I had heard of who had, at least for Shabbat, and this would not work for a very long service or would not work if you had little kids, but there was a drive-in movie theater in their town. And so they used that drive-in movie theater space and had everybody be in their cars or by family. And that way they were somewhat together, but also distanced. And I think they used a radio frequency to broadcast to people, or had a mic system set up. I'm not sure how that worked, but they did it that way. And that way people could stay in their cars and, you know, be with each other and, you know, not be staring at Zoom the entire time, but, you know, also observe safety that way. So, I mean, you can get creative with this. You can get really creative with this. You know, another rabbi I had heard of had almost like a drive-through kind of thing, right? So they had a circular idea set up for their parking lot where cars would come in, and this particular rabbi was one of 3 at their congregation. And so they had like a shofar station, and they were thinking about having a talk to the rabbi station, and then I forget what the third thing was, but you know, you get the point. Like you can make this as creative as you want. I mean, that's one of the positives of this entire situation, is you can really go out for it if you want to.
Rebecca, did you have your hand raised?
I believe Linda did, right?
There we go. Going back to some of the procedures, I think one of the most interesting ones that you brought out to think about was the going and coming. I think that was something to make sure that we're only coming in or leaving spaced apart. I was just curious of talking about the air and other things, and I know you don't have an answer, Rabbi, but I mean, I'm just thought if anyone else has had experience with them coming in and spraying, you know, to disinfect. I've noticed a lot of advertisements on television about coming in, and even though we're feeling that, you know, we've been closed up for so long that, you know, we don't think there would be anything to worry about. I don't know if anyone has looked into it or considered it and got any kind of answers or response.
Before you open up, you're probably going to have to disinfect everything just to
Think
begin
so?
with. Even if you haven't used it in a couple of months, just in terms of safety precaution, making people feel safe. That's what I'm hearing. And, you know, maybe even between services, right? If you have a break between a morning and an early afternoon, or if you have multiple different Yizkor in person or whatever else you want to do, having some kind of sanitization process in effect, volunteers, whatever you want to do, in between, I've also heard is what some people are doing. But again, this is based on your own communities, and you guys have to make this decision of what you guys think is best for you.
So I'll just throw this out, since we're almost doing a little brainstorming here. One of the things, our group, and Linda and Rebecca we're all together. So we had a discussion Sunday, just trying to throw out some ideas, you know, thoughts, and how we might make all of this happen. And I completely lost what I was just going to say. I am telling you, it left the building. Elvis is gone. What in the world was I going to say? Well, somebody else talk, because I'm telling you, it just left the building.
This is not the first time this has happened, just so y'all know.
That's very true. That's very true.
Okay, well, Leslie, we're going to bring it back, because you said since we were brainstorming here, and you were thinking about.
1 minute.
Okay, it'll come back. Linda, did you have something?
Sorry, my dog is past dinner time, and he's letting me know. I forgot to mute me. I apologize.
Sherry, welcome. We are we're sort of brainstorming, and we have recorded this this presentation, but we're sort of just sharing some thoughts, or if you have any questions about what you're doing, feel free to unmute yourself and share that at this time. It's gone, huh, Leslie? Okay.
Or Sherry, I don't know if you have anything that you wanna ask. Just, you know, again, I know I said this earlier, but just make sure that you guys keep up communication with your communities and experiment, you know, practice. You know, this is not something you want to be doing for the first time on, you know, on Kol Nidre. So, or on Rosh Hashanah Erev, or whatever else you want to do. And there's a lot of really good opportunities here, both in terms of planning things and involving more people in the community in the planning, and also in terms of just doing new things. Linda?
I was wondering, we were talking earlier, and I was just going to bring Sherry up because she wasn't here, about shortening the service and doing what's important. My understanding is there are certain things that we must do in order for it to be a kosher service. Is there a listing somewhere of things, or that you can supply, of things that we must cover to make it kosher?
So the issue with the word must is that it depends on who you ask. Because if you ask somebody, say, in the Orthodox Union, they're going to say that every last prayer is a necessity, and sometimes more than once.
We're Reformed.
I understand that, but, you know, just, you know, I have liturgical outlines of how to go through a service. I would also suggest maybe reading Divrei Mishkan HaNefesh, which is like the Gates of Understanding, but for the most recent prayer book, except it's like this thin as opposed to this thick. And it goes through the history and like the reasoning behind the different prayers and the prayer decisions for including them in their order in the modern Machzor, High Holiday Prayer Book. In terms of what is must, when you're Reform, technically that's an individual choice. I've heard of some rabbis who have chosen, because they can't be in a minyan, because they can't be in a synagogue, they've chosen to not do certain parts of the service that I personally find are requirements every single time I lead, regardless of where I am or who I'm with. So it's really personal, up to you guys. I would say that this is not Shabbat. So there are parts of the liturgy that are high holiday specific that I would try to include, because that's the whole point. It's a separate and special time of year and a separate and special service. You know, but you don't necessarily need to say Avinu Malkeinu 6 times. You know, you don't necessarily need to say Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha 6 times. You can kind of cut some of the repetitions down if you want, I would say. But in terms of what's the bare minimum, you know, I can tell you what.
Well, Rabbi Sim, I just volunteered you in the chat box that we'll share a service outline that, again, there's some choice within. You know, here's some basics outline, but you know, you choose this part, you choose this part, or choose to do a prayer 1 time as opposed to 6 times. Rabbi Sim isn't going to tell you exactly how to do your service.
Right. And again, that also feeds into what your community finds is the most important. What's the most important part of the high holidays? If hearing that Barbara Streisand Avinu Malkeinu is what people really want, then you got to figure out, you know, are you going to play a recording? Because you can play an audio recording on Zoom and that works. You can play an audio recording in the synagogue and that works. You know, if that's one of those parts that absolutely must be in there, then that will inform your liturgy choices. You know, if having that trio of the violin, the cello, and the singer for Kol Nidre is one of those most important pieces for your community, that will inform that liturgy choice. So, you know, it's very individualistic, especially when you're talking Reform. Conservative has a bit more structure with this, but you know, since you are asking as a Reform synagogue, that's not as relevant for you.
Monty, we
All
haven't
right.
called on you. Do you have any questions? And if so, just unmute yourself, please.
No, we actually, my board actually met on this past Sunday, and we discussed many of these same items. We're still trying to figure out, the devil's in the details, but we're gonna try to do a hybrid, some streaming, and we have a big enough sanctuary where we can spread out. In fact, we tested it out kind of inadvertently on Monday when we had a mikveh service for one of our congregants who wanted to say, who's was a yard site for her father. And there were about 20 people in the congregation, and we spread out pretty well. We debated whether to have RSVP seating for our members, but that's one of those details. We can set up chairs to space people out. But we're going to we're going to run through. We're going to do some practice run-throughs and see what we can get done. We don't have a rabbi, but we have Merrill Shapiro, who lives down in South Florida. He's agreed to help us, so he'll probably stream it from his house, and we'll figure it out. But I did like, Rabbi, I do appreciate you saying that certain parts can be left out and certain parts can be done, and the service can be shortened. That is one of the things that we debated, we discussed. We didn't really have any guidance, so I'll be looking forward to your little, your little list on what we can leave out and what we can do, and give it.
Again, it's not going to be a list of what you can leave out and what you can do. It's I can give you example service outlines. I mean, right. Would a liturgical walkthrough be something that people would be interested in? Because I'd be happy to do a different Zoom session on, just going through liturgy. Because it can be very, very difficult, especially if you're not used to it. And high holidays are once a year. It's it can be a bit difficult. And I would also like to say that even when you're cutting for a Zoom service, you can have multiple services, right? Especially for Yom Kippur afternoon. Usually that's 3 different services that most congregations put into one, maybe 2 if they have a 5-minute break between Yizkor and the rest of it. So, you can break those back out into separate services, or you can break out the Torah service, or you can break it, you can find ways to accommodate the liturgy and still, still have things be timely.
Yes, thank you. Any help? This was really informative tonight, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Glad to help.
Auntie, I'll tell you that our group also just tossed around the idea potentially of reservations and determining how many people we can have within our synagogue and still maintain that distancing. And again, we don't have 100 people that come to our services, so we have a little more. And we had also talked about potentially the hybrid, or maybe being able to Zoom while some people are at the synagogue, kind of Zooming or net meeting or whatever, so that people could at least see what was going on, even though they could not participate. But those who just feel like there's no way they could come to the synagogue, at least they'd be able to participate.
Just to be clear, though, streaming in is a form of participation. So, again, it's about reframing the way we think about things, right? In the Reform movement, you're still part of the minyan if you're streaming now, and also for the conservative for the purposes of COVID. And so this is a way for people to participate if they don't feel comfortable coming physically to the synagogue. And I think that's a good idea that I failed to mention, is that even if you do a physical service, you can also stream it at the same time. And that way, if there are individuals within your congregation who do not feel comfortable coming to a physical location, they can still be a part of the community. They can still worship together. And that's always an option too.
I'm so glad, Linda, I'm going to cut it off at this point. We're about an hour in, but thank you for your participation today. We do have some follow-up. I took several notes, and we have some follow-ups that we will send out to you. And we will be putting many of these resources available on our website so that others who are unable to attend can have the benefit. And, feel free to reach out to us if there's additional resources or whatever might be helpful that we can help with, we want to do so. As Rabbi Sim said, this is a high holidays like no other, and we're all going to do the best that we can. So thank you for being here, and I want to thank Rabbi Sim for putting the resources together for all of us.
And I just wanted to say one last comment. Both the conservative and the reform, I believe also the reconstructionist, but I haven't quite found those resources yet. But at least with the reform and the conservative, they have hours of webinars about how to go about planning, about how to think about this, about what to do. I watched a bunch of them. I tried to synthesize the best parts of that and the conversation into this particular presentation, but there's a lot more information already out there. And, you know, I would, you know, not to steal from St. Augustine, but Tole Lege, go and read. Best I can do is like stay informed and you know, read up on things.
So thank you all. Have a great evening, and you'll be hearing from us again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.